In Advent, a light shines in the darkness. One single candle pierces the gloom this week, and it grows week by week to 2, to 3, to 4, as we move into the darkest days of the year. The light grows brighter and greater as the days grow shorter and darker. I thought of the Nobel Prize winning novelist Doris Lessing on this subject of light, of sunlight. In one of her stories, she points to the sun rising, painting the earth and sky afresh. Painting the earth, painting the sky afresh. It's like the sun stealing over Lexington at sunrise and at sunset. Just now, as I was stealing out the side door to come around the front, I caught a glimpse of the sunset, and it was beautiful. It made me catch my breath. I'm not exaggerating. Having one's breath taken away by the beauty of God's creation. Did you notice? That's the thing. It's in the noticing. God's grace bursts through creation so that we can more easily recognize Him. St. Ignatius says this in the spiritual exercises. That we can more easily recognize Him, yes, even amid the darkness of winter. That's what the Christmas lights represent. Beauty breaks through our city and over our fields, radiating God's light, especially in our personal darkness, in our personal darknesses. Advent is a 4-week retreat of waiting, patiently paying attention to the action of God in our midst. We are preparing for Christ's incarnation, are we not? We celebrated Christmas because Christ came to free us from darkness, which is to say, from our sin, to bring us salvation. This is the kernel of our faith, its core seed. It is called the kerygma, the very kernel. God breaks into our lives as light, born into our midst. And in the moments of our daily activity, He dispels darkness and brings us what? Hope. For Christ has already come, and He continually comes into our lives. We continually wait and watch patiently. Our lives are a continual advent, or they should be, if we're watching, waiting, noticing patiently. The first reading today speaks of God fulfilling His promise to keep us safe and secure. Now, considering world events, we certainly need to hear this. Sin is in the world, yes, but this is not the whole story. There are calamities and catastrophes, yes, but this is not the whole story. The new virus variant that took over our entire news cycle yesterday and is still with us is not the whole story. As Jesus says in the gospel today, which is all too real with the calamities and catastrophes that He's talking about. It's all too real to us. We need to be, as He says, vigilant at all times and not let the anxieties of life distract us. For Jesus is the just shoot foretold by the prophet Jeremiah, and He makes us dwell secure, as we heard. So how do we do this? How do we pay attention? How do we notice? How do we watch patiently? St. Ignatius tells us to do the spiritual exercise called the examine of consciousness. Not examination of conscience, what did I do right, what did I do wrong, not that. Examine of consciousness, the content, examine the content of your consciousness. What did I notice? What did I see? Where did I feel lifted up? Something I saw, something that somebody said, a kind action, a gesture. Where did I feel an increase of faith, of hope, of love? That's the presence of God breaking in upon us in unexpected ways, bringing peace. We call it grace. God breaking in, breaking through. That's light. That's the message of Advent. The light growing in the darkness. The second letter of St. Peter says it so well. I love these lines. You will do well to pay attention to it, as to a light shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. Where does the morning star rise in your heart? God's light is always mediated by others. Grace works through nature. Who brings God's light to you? To whom do you bring God's light in return? The examine of consciousness could be a blessed spiritual activity promising an advent of growing light, like the Christmas lights we see popping up everywhere. This graceful reawakening of God's light leads us, the inbreaking of God's light leads us, of course, to, as we heard today, increase and abound in love for one another and for all, as St. Paul describes in the second reading. Where is there an increase of faith, hope, and love? In you. Ask for this grace, this Advent, to pay attention to the light shining in dark places. It's the promise of Advent, the transfiguration of the landscape of our lives, painting our lives afresh in our continuing Advent. Hang on these 4 weeks. Praise be Jesus Christ.